Welcome back to the Forensics Detailing channel. Today we're looking at all the variants of the different products you can use to clay your car. We have clay cloths, clay pads, and the old clay bars. Which one is the best? Which one should you buy? That is the aim of the video, to explore that. This thing is soaking wet. Welcome back to the Forensics Detailing channel. So clay bars versus clay cloths versus clay towels. Let's give you some serious information here, guys. So I want to kind of provide you with recommendations and stuff like that. Ultimately, the only way for you to know is to try this sort of stuff. And I shouldn't be saying that in the video because it makes people disappear. Go, oh, this video's no use for me. But that's the truth. The only way to know is to try stuff. And I'm going to try and give you an opinion on what I think about this. Now, first of all, let's talk about money. Quite simply, guys, on price alone, the clay block potentially might offer you the best value for money, closely followed by the clay cloth and the clay bar. But the reality is the difference is not significant, at least for me. If you're spending 15 quid for 100 grams of clay, then suddenly that gap can get bigger. So typically clay cloths and clay pads, they'll claim in the product claims that you'll save money over clay. Yes, you might well do, so that product claim is true, but there might not be that much in it. Next up, guys, which ones are more effective at removing contamination pound for pound? Now here's the clever thing, well here's the difficult thing, not the clever thing, is that you can't really test pound for pound, can you? Because you've got fine clay cloths, medium clay cloths, aggressive clay cloths, same with clay bars, and there is a big difference in them. They use different abrasives. They might use finer micro abrasives in these fine clays, and then in the aggressive clays, a lot more abrasive perhaps, and bigger abrasive size, so it's more, you get more scrub, you're going to take more contamination off. Very hard to compare, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a comparison. And I've used clay bar a lot, obviously. Clay cloths I've used a little bit, and clay pads, these are new to me, but I've got a clay pad which I've used a few times, which is not as good as this, but it's just a kind of cheap Chinese one. What I will say, guys, is that in my opinion, clay bar seems to pull more contamination off of the car per swipe than the clay cloths or clay pads. I think when you're using small amounts of this, all of the pressure kind of gets put down on a much smaller surface area, and they just feel more abrasive. You can feel what's going on the surface, and it seems to strip the contaminant quicker with less passes. Now, the clay cloth and the clay pad, especially the clay cloth, you can cover a much bigger area, surface area with it. But you can only put your hand down on one bit of it. So a lot of the time with the clay cloth, there's areas of cloth which are just sort of flopping on the paintwork. And then where the weight of your hand is, you're going to probably be doing more scrubbing. But you can really scrub a section a lot quicker, which makes sense. But in my opinion, you have to do a lot more passes with that clay towel and clay pad to get the contamination off that perhaps a few passes of this smaller chunk of clay would give you. But the net result, guys, is that I think if you were doing like a race of timing yourself to clay a car, you would do it quickest with the clay cloth, then followed by this clay pad, which is just still a slightly smaller surface area, and then you'd be last with the clay bar. However, if you were measuring how much contamination you got off on all of those cars, I believe you'd get most off with the clay bar, in my opinion. Now, what are the risks with the clay bar? The main risks around this, guys, or let's talk about the negatives. Any contaminants that you pull out of the car's paintwork are forever stuck in the clay, and the more contaminant you pull, the dirtier the clay bar gets. After you've used it a few times, you need to discard it. A lot of the contaminants that you pull off with the clay cloth and the clay pad, you can wash off, so it's handy to have a little bucket with wash solution in there that you can just wash it, you know, and rinse some of the contaminants off. Some will stick there, typically tar and glue and stuff like that will stick in the surface of this, so it does still build up, but less than this. Another risk is it's very easy to drop clay bar, isn't it? You know, it's quite easy, it's very easily done. And if I dropped it on this workshop floor, it would pull up a lot of grit, and I would discard it after that, guys. You know, you can pick bits off and stuff, but it's just not expensive enough nowadays to go back to my car when I've got, you know, little bits of hard grit in there, really. For me, if you drop the clay cloth or the clay pad, you would just rinse them off and go again. So they're slightly better on that front. They're slightly harder to drop, I find, as well. Okay, so that's the main risk with clay. The main risks with clay cloth is that if you use an over-aggressive product and you use too much pressure, you can haze up, almost like when you're kind of wet sanding, because all the little high spots on the orange peeled surface on your car, you can haze up that finish. And I've seen it being done firsthand by other people, and it's very easy to do because none of the clay cloths, let's not blame the end user, none of the clay cloths really tell you about it and sort of say, some might say use light pressure and stuff like that, so maybe I'm being a bit harsh. So that's a risk with the clay cloth. I've not seen that kind of happen so much with the clay pads, but I don't know if it's possible. You tell me, guys. I should imagine that if you're using really aggressive clay pads and you go in harder with it, perhaps you could also have that same risk as well. All of the types of marring that, or scratches or anything that's left behind in the paintwork is obviously the stuff that you can polish out, but not always are people claying and doing full correction afterwards. So there is often a requirement to clay with the minimal amount of marring, but just as a general practice as well, when you're removing contamination from paintwork, you want to minimise the damage that you're putting back into that paintwork, just as a good method of working, don't you? One other advantage of the clay bar, guys, is that you really do get a better feel of what's going on in the paintwork. There's no sponge or no soft microfiber cloth between you and the clay, so the feedback, if you like, of what's going on when you're rubbing over the surface, you can feel it in your fingers. I'm going to do my wet, wet, wet song. You really can. You can just feel when you hit the contaminant, and you can feel a bit easier when it's smoother. I think you can also feel the extra abrasion and like the drag with the clay bar, which is something that I like. There is also an advantage with clay bar in very intricate areas on the car. These work best when you've got that swipe thing going, and so does the clay bar, to be honest, but there's certain tight areas where you can just get in and under with the clay, where it's a bit more awkward with the clay cloth and the clay pads to get to. Guys, I'm running out of things to say now. You're going to start getting the general gist of these things. These clay cloths and clay pads, when I first saw them, I was cynical about them, and I thought, I just don't need those. And you know what, I don't really need them. And if I had to pick, someone says, John, you can only have one, what are you going to use? For me, it would be clay bar, but I really like having a clay cloth around, and maybe even a clay pad. It doesn't really matter to me, but something that I can use to cover the main surfaces a lot quicker. Perhaps if I was having to detail a car in one day and I knew the contamination level was quite light, I would just go in with the clay cloth or the clay pad, and I would try and get round that car in, you know, half an hour, mate, potentially, because so I've got more time left for polishing as quickly as possible. But right now I'm trying to decontaminate my M140, and my priority is to kind of not do it as quickly as possible. The priority is to get as much contamination off all of the car, and that's where I find I'm just reaching for these slightly less, and I've been testing them, you know, all against each other, and the clay bar is the one that I kind of want to reach for when they're in the bucket. I just feel like I'm getting more off, even though it's taking me longer to get round. So guys, I hope that's really useful. I really always with these videos, guys, one thing I've learned over the years, there's a lot of people watching with a hell of a lot of experience. Let me know what you think about these as a general kind of thing, the differences between them. Give me your experience of these kind of 3 products, and feed that back in the comments, because it also makes the video a hell of a lot more valuable when other people discover it and they see all these great comments. So I always encourage that. Other than that, guys, all three products are viable. There are some slight cost savings to be had. There are some time savings to be had with the others, but ultimately this one is going to come down to personal choice. Thank you very much for watching the Forensics Detailing channel. I'll see you soon on other videos.